Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Clinician podcast. This week's episode, I'm so close to hitting the delete button right now. It's a bit of a reflection on how I got to be where I am, so that I can encourage and inspire you to keep doing the work. Now, the work is not always just turning up and seeing clients. The work is not always building and leading a high-performing team. Quite often in this building of a health business, this entrepreneurial journey, the work is the self-development that comes hand in hand with building anything of value. So here's an invitation for you to sit back and listen and enjoy my "How the heck did I end up here" story. Welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneurial Clinician podcast. Okay, so I've spent a bit of time agonizing over what I was going to be speaking on today and what I wanted to share with you and share with the world today. So this has the potential to be a bit of a vulnerable share, but I think it's an important share because we know as health professionals living in this current age that without a level of vulnerability, we can't grow. Without a level of authenticity, people won't want to connect with us. And I think after the years of COVID, and in my case, COVID and cancer, the things that we know that the world is hungry for is connection. Connection with self, connection with others, connection with our society, connection with our physiology, connection with our planet. I had not understood the need and the power of connection until I really had to start thinking about my own disconnected self and brought it back to the wonderful hierarchy that Abraham Maslow provided for us and realized that connection actually is a part of what I need to survive. So how did I end up here? How did I end up speaking to you on a podcast on the 21st of April? What year are we in? 2023. Yeah, I'm still asking myself what year it is. So if you are new to me and new to my world and you don't know who I am, because, here's some insight. When I was talking to some people about this episode and everyone's like, yes, Jo, you need to do that episode. I was like, but everybody knows this stuff about me. It became quite apparent that many people don't. Because regardless of the fact of how much time and effort I have put into writing blogs over the last 10 years, it doesn't mean that you've all read them or that you even remember them or that I even remember them. Or the video series I did called This is Private Practice, you may not have seen that. So here I am again, sharing with those of you who may be new to me or who may have forgotten, how the heck did I end up here? And it's an incredibly empowering conversation for you to have with yourself. So let me share with you how I ended up here so that you can be empowered and inspired to have this conversation with yourself, maybe with some trusted people around you. So as I record this and share with you, I'm 50 years old. Yes, I have become that person who watches middle-aged things. I don't like going out at night. I have creaky bones and joints in the morning. I have a lot more supplements on my table. If somebody invites me to go somewhere, I have a long list of considerations that I need to make before I say yes. I have become that person and I am okay with it. In fact, I love her, I appreciate her, and I respect her. And I haven't always been able to say that about myself. So I was born in 1972. Yes, people, 1972. And I was born into a very middle-class family where my dad decided he was going to be self-employed. It was a big deal for him. He had this belief in himself that he was built for something more than just having a job and just working for wages. And you can kind of go, oh, no wonder you're as successful as what you are, Jo. Yeah, my dad wasn't a great example. And that's okay. Because you know what? I get to take what I learned from him and iterate on it and improve on it and make the world a better place for the people who come after me. Because I am such a big believer in that now, that I don't exist in a vacuum. I exist as a part of this in this world, this community. So I am the eldest of three daughters. And I grew up in a middle-class family, probably an upper middle-class family. I've always lived in suburbia. It's what I know. It's what I'm safe with. And I had the privilege of being able to finish my high schooling and go to university. And it was a really difficult time for me when I finished high school, because here in Australia, the way we were assessed and the way we gained entry into universities back in the early 1990s was I'd put a lot of pressure on myself. And I didn't do as well in my marks as I wanted, and I didn't get my first choices. I didn't fail anything, but I felt like a failure. And I was incredibly anxious and incredibly, like I would be your typical type A personality if we ascribe to that thing anymore. So I've known about anxiety for a long time. I had a major depressive episode during my university days. It was a horrible time for me and my family. And it's something that we never talked about again. We basically just got through it, and we kind of started treating Jo really fragile, and like we needed to make sure she was going to be okay. So it probably doesn't surprise any of you to learn that I chose a discipline called rehabilitation counselling. Now, rehabilitation counsellors, when I graduated, we had an undergraduate health sciences degree. We went to the same university and on the same campus as occupational therapists and physiotherapists and speech pathologists, which is what I really wanted to be when I was 17, and radiographers and radiologists and all types of allied health professionals. I actually went to a university campus that was called Cumberland College of Health Sciences. It doesn't exist like that anymore. It's been swallowed up by the University of Sydney, but that's okay. It's history. It's what happens. So here I am, and I was the first person in my family to go to university, which is a bit of a big deal. My parents both had to age 16 high school educations, and they wanted better for their kids, because that's what most families of middle class privilege that I've had are trying to do for our families and trying to do for our kids. So I grew up in a family where we were led to believe that we were always living on the verge of bankruptcy. But that was the money story that I internalized. That was the money story that I heard, that I was expensive, that my needs, anything I wanted, my needs would be taken care of, but anything that I wanted outside of that was going to be a fight. And it was just better not to try and have the conversation. And I learned very early on that advocating for myself wasn't pleasant, because the adults in my world didn't know what to do with that, or didn't know how to do with that, because they were so busy trying to do life and trying to manage money and trying to build a business and trying to look after a family and trying to have a relationship with themselves. Sound familiar? Sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. And I'm not blaming anyone. I am not shaming anyone. I'm just sharing with you how I got to where we are. But this money story of mine made me feel very, very unsafe. Looking back now, I can see that the household that I grew up in was quite chaotic for me. It was very, very busy. And my parents were just trying so hard to give us girls, because I'm one of three sisters, give us girls better opportunities. And that's okay. They were doing what they could. But looking back on it now and having done some inner work around this, I can understand that created a lot of instability and feelings of unsafe for me. And this money thing got so entrenched in me needing to work harder to prove myself worthy of being able to be allowed to have something or even want something. So I'm sure many of you have similar money stories. So I grew up feeling like I was an inconvenience. I grew up feeling like I had to perform. I grew up feeling like, nothing I ever wanted I wasn't worthy of the things that I wanted. Can you start to see how this plays out in other parts of my life or in other parts of my relationships? So I built a career around rehabilitation counselling. Now, because my dad had been self-employed, and because I watched him have his first major heart attack at age 37, I decided that I would never be self-employed, because in my family, self-employed made you sick. And I had already been battling with anxiety and major depression. I didn't want to be any more sick, which I find hilarious, because if you followed any of my stories, I'm pretty much, I just recovered from cancer, for goodness sake. So there's this thing that's kind of perpetuated along my life now, which is around money and around my health. So I had built this career and I went to work for other people. I've worked in government. I've worked in various levels of government here in Australia, and I had the incredible opportunity to work for the now non-existent Commonwealth Rehabilitation Service. At the time, I didn't realise how fortunate I was to have started my career there, because it felt like a lot of hard work and I was still learning about myself. But that really created an opportunity for me to explore this world of work and how I wanted to turn up in it. I have had the opportunity to work in rural New South Wales, which I love working in rural and remote communities. My career has given me opportunities to work in New South Wales Health and keep nurses nursing. I did that for nearly 15 years. That was incredibly rewarding work. And now I have built my own private practice. Now, I did that out of a season where I felt like I had totally gone against all of my values. I woke up one day and found myself acting as a manager in a workplace in a very, very unhealthy and unhelpful way. I heard myself speak to an employee in a way that I found atrocious. And all of this behavior at the time felt like it was being rewarded. But I could no longer live with that, and I no longer wanted to accept that. So I resigned and I quit. And that was a really awkward, uncomfortable time for myself. It was in my 30s, and I basically took myself out of the workforce to try and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, because I'd made the decision by then that I obviously couldn't cut it as a health professional. I obviously couldn't cut it as a leader. I obviously couldn't cut it as anybody trying to do a hybrid of both. So I obviously needed to find another career. So I decided that I was going to learn how to trade the US stock market, because apparently a trained monkey can do that, but Jo with her university degree can't. So this was now around the time of the global financial crisis, which I'd never lived through, didn't know what it meant. So I gifted the US economy my life savings. I know, thank you. And then I had to go and work out how I was going to put food on the table, because by now my first marriage had fallen apart, or I'd chosen to leave it, and I had a child depending on me. And that was, I was in a state of, just trying to put food on the table. That's how my private practice started. So last week's episode was all about bootstrapping, if you remember that. Well, this is my bootstrapping story. I had a phone, I had a car, I had a laptop. I needed to go and make some money. So I did. I went to market. I went and built relationships and said, who are the clients you were struggling with? Let me see if I can help you. And that's kind of how I started my business. And it grew quickly. Within 6 weeks, I brought on my first associate, but I had no clue what I was doing. And it just grew and grew and grew and grew until it couldn't grow anymore, because my capacity wasn't growing, because I was continuing to do all the clinical work and just give the overflows to my associate. I was trying to manage people now, which I'd already had this belief system that I couldn't manage people. I had no concept that I needed to develop as a leader, and I had no understanding of what it took to build a business, because I had no role model, right? I'd watched my father burn through what felt like a lot of money and make my life feel very unsafe. So I brought those patterns of my childhood with me because they were familiar, and let's face it, I didn't know anything else. But I also knew, and I had enough insight when I started my business to know that I wasn't going to do it the same way my dad did. So I started investing in coaching. And like a lot of people, I invested in coaching that made me feel good about myself, that I thought was going to help me grow my business, not realizing that building your own business will be the most significant personal development journey you have ever been on. So if you are an entrepreneurial clinician, if you are somebody who is looking at how you can turn up in the world and how you can serve and how you can add value and how you can receive income from that, then this message is really important to you. Because it is not enough for us to turn up with, our tools of the trade, our clinical skills. The investment in our personal development is what will help us succeed or even define what success is going to be for us. So I remember being so excited with my first coaching opportunity. I would travel from Sydney to Melbourne. I was learning so much about human behavior, which I thought was hilarious because I had this behavioral sciences degree. Wasn't I supposed to be an expert in that stuff? Many of you are laughing at me right now. I get it. My husband and I were doing it together. My second husband and I were doing it together. I met some wonderful people. But I still wasn't, it got to a point where that had served me well, but then I needed to move on. And then I moved on and I found somewhere else I needed to go. And then I moved on and I found somewhere else to go. And in this desire to understand how to build this thing called business, I made what I now perceive to be one of the biggest errors that I have ever made. And it is still something to this day that I go, wow, I wish I'd done that differently. I continued to grow without stabilizing. I wanted to do all the things that I thought were a good idea without stabilizing. Instead of making very strong foundations and roots, I actually took myself out of my business, thinking it would just continue to grow and flourish while I went and pursued other things. Wanted to become a speaker. So I did some speakership training, wanted to do more corporate work, did some more, wanted to work differently within corporates, wanted to become a wellness provider, wanted to become a coach. All of these different things were actually masking the genuine problem here, which was I was starting to feel bored because I didn't understand that boredom is actually a significant milestone in the development of any business. Boredom is actually a sign that you have done something really well. I was terrified of boredom. It feels, for somebody who grew up in a chaotic household, who is used to feeling anxious, you can imagine that boredom is really uncomfortable. But boredom now for me tells me that I am close to creating another redundancy, which means I have significant stability in my business to remove myself from a task, a workflow, a division, a process that then allows me the freedom to be able to choose to do something new, to reiterate, iterate, innovate, change, build, grow, develop without fearing that the things that I'm moving away from will collapse. Now, I share this because in this year alone, and it's April, I have been working one-on-one with so many clients who have chosen to scale before they stabilize. And I can see it, and it breaks my heart because I know what's happening. And then then they're coming to me afterwards going, Jo, I wish I had worked with you before I tried to scale. I'm going, yes, of course, because you weren't ready. We didn't have enough stability in place. You weren't stable in yourself enough. You hadn't reached that place of boredom yet. So one of my biggest regrets, for want of another word, but one of the things I come back to is I wish back in 2016 that I had spent the time getting bored and stabilizing before launching out into a brand new thing. Now, I do not begrudge the learnings that I've had along the way, but reflective practice is powerful, right? I am now in a position where I get to learn from that and be able to engage with myself on my ongoing personal development journey about how do I want to do things differently now? Where do I want the redundancies to turn up now? These are conversations I'm having with myself, which are very different to conversations I was having prior to 2016. My goal now as the owner of this business is to make myself redundant. Not sack myself, just not needed in the way that I turn up today, because that will tell me that I have grown and created something that is self-sustaining, that doesn't rely on me. And I think that's what my dad was pursuing, but didn't know how to do it. And I thank him right now for the gift that he's given me to be able to use his experiences and what I grew up with as a way of going, how can we do this differently? So if you've heard this today and you've thought boredom is bad, we don't do boredom, I want you to think about that, because boredom potentially means something very different for you, and it's something that you can work on and something that you can work through. Because I want to encourage everybody listening to this that I think we all need to get back to a place of being a little bit bored and not being scared of it. Because for the last 2.5 years, we have been in hypervigilance, right? Since the pandemic came into the world, we have been living in hypervigilance. We were actually living in it beforehand, but COVID just brought it to the fore. So I don't think there's any harm in us getting to a place where our nervous system and our brain feel safe enough to experience some boredom. Now, I'm not bored with you. I'm not bored with me. It's not a place I want to stay in. I just don't think we need the pursuit of moving away from it as fast as we often think we do. So what can you take away from this information today? Well, I want you to spend some time thinking about your origin story. And I invite you to come to the Future Proofing Health Professionals Facebook group, because we'll be talking about it some more in there, your origin stories. Not because we want pats on the back or we are trying to get on a big ego trip here, but it's important to understand where we've come from so we can understand where we're headed. Don't get too far ahead of yourself, but also don't keep yourself stuck. You need we need other people around us to give us perspective. So I invite you to come along and think through and talk about some parts of your origin story that might be turning up for you in your work. It won't be a therapy session, I promise you, but it will be a really good conversation that we can have. I want you to think about the people around you that you let speak into your life. These might be coaches or mentors that you exchange money with. They might be people that you pay. They might be valuable people that you bring into your world that you don't have an exchange of money with. But you need to have people around you that give you perspective. I am a huge believer in career-long clinical supervision, because here in Australia, we don't have the same. What I mean is you need somebody in your world that you can go and talk to about your work and how you show up in your work. So that it might be called clinical consultation where you are in the world. I like to call it clinical supervision because it helps keep me healthy so that I can keep turning up and doing my work. So I have coaches, I have a clinical supervisor, I have what I call my board of advisors. And if you're looking for a really good resource on how you can get the right types of people around you, then I recommend you get a hold of Janine Garner's book called It's Who You Know. It's the book I use a lot. It's an incredibly easy framework, but I can assure you it will start to revolutionize how you show up in the world because of the people you invite into your world. So that's my origin story. That's a little bit about who I am and how I turned up in the world. So if you were to ask me right now, Jo, how do you describe who you are and what you do? This is how I do it. Hi, I'm Jo. I'm a career-loving mum. Now, that doesn't tell you a lot about where I've come from and what I've done, but it does tell you a heck of a lot about the work that I've been doing through my personal development journey that is my business, to be able to confidently say, I am Jo Muirhead, a career-loving mum. So I would love to know from you, how do you like to describe yourself? How do you want to turn up in the world? So until next episode, go be your awesome self. Hey, Jo Muirhead here again. Thank you for watching this episode of the Entrepreneurial Clinician. It has been great to share guests, new information and new ways of thinking with you. I trust that this episode today has inspired you and has helped you to reconnect to your sense of purpose as a health professional and a clinician. Before we move on, just want to remind you that these sessions, these episodes, are provided for educational purposes only. Nothing in these episodes is designed to be treatment specific or a specific recommendation about your health, your wellness, or your finances for your situation specifically. If you need assistance in any of these areas, please reach out to an appropriate professional for you to be able to access the help that you need. If you have enjoyed these episodes and would like to see more, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure you leave me a comment below. And I look forward to bringing you more great, inspiring stories where I get to learn just as much as you do. Until next time, go be your awesome self.